Hi, good evening, and welcome to this session today. We're looking at continuing with the Learning Outcome 2, in the unit that we are studying, which is contemporary issues in tourism and hospitality management. Now, just a bit of quick recap in regards to what we studied in the first session. In the first session, we picked up things in terms of understanding what are contemporary issues or modern issues or ongoing issues within the tourism and hospitality sector. We also looked at understanding how some of these issues can affect the tourism and hospitality industry and what these issues are in particular. So if I just quickly pull out the presentation we discussed with regards to the first learning outcome, we talked about starting with the concept of social issues, looking at how the international trade organization describes social issues in tourism. Then we came to contemporary issues or issues that we see in terms of how to maintain and look at sustainable tourism. We looked at things like how does tourism activity has a long-term impact on the environment, in particular climate change and global warming, which we discussed about. We look at the shortage of talent within the sector, higher education which is required within this sector in order to provide the service levels and the quality of service which the customers demand. And then obviously we went into all the assessment areas to understand what are the key social issues, how do you define them, and how they affect the development of tourism and hospitality industry. We focused in particular on four broad types. One was sustainable development, we looked at labor costs, we looked at multicultural issues, and obviously the issue of education and training, which is very important within the sector. Now, in terms of continuing with our journey in terms of learning outcome 2, you're going to be looking at understanding, critically analyzing some of these contemporary issues that we've studied in learning outcome 1. And what we're going to do is obviously break these issues down into 3 different types. One will be understanding social issues and go into details in terms of what are these social issues affecting tourism. Second, what we'll do is we'll understand the environmental issues, which are focused around the the definition of sustainable development of tourism. And here we would understand things which are related to environment and how the environmental issues are affecting this sector. And then towards the end, what we'll look at doing is look into a bit more detail on the technological issues, which even though advancements in technology is enabling this sector in many different ways, we do get to see that technology at times could also become an issue. And what are these technological issues which impact this sector is what we will look at studying in the assessment criteria 2.3. So really the learning outcome 2 is all about getting into analysis and understanding some of these deeper issues, some of these issues in depth that we covered in learning outcome 1. So let's get into it, and I've put together a few slides, and I've got 1-2 handouts which I'm going to try and provide just after the session, which will allow you to develop a deeper understanding into some of these 3 different types of issues that we're going to be focused on studying today. So let's look at the first one in terms of looking at, I would say, the social issues. And when we look at dwelling into social issues, what I want to be able to do is also discuss in a bit more detail with regards to what are these social issues, how do we classify these issues as social issues, and then why they are important in particular for this sector. So let's look at understanding some terminology behind what is sociology. What is, where does this term social issues come from? So when we look at sociology, in particular, this term sociology refers to the study of society, and it's normally concerned with, the people's behavior, their attitude, their interaction with other people within the community. Now, in terms of looking at understanding, social issues, we need to understand what is the role of society within tourism and hospitality sector. So when we understand society, it refers to obviously the patterns of how social organizations exist within our communities. When you look at the social values, the culture, and the beliefs which people have in a particular community will kind of constitute the society and the type of beliefs and attitude that particular set of society will have, or people within that particular society will have towards say a particular sector like tourism. Now, when we talk about society, when we talk about social issues, we also talk about culture, because culture is all about how people interact, and how they are kind of behaving, and how you're observing them when people do social interactions, when we get into relationships, when we look at things that we possess, things that we use, consume. They are all related to culture. So when we look at just a simple example here, when we look at the difference in culture, we look at we having tea in the morning. At the cultural side of things would be, if I say during the summer we have we have 3 or 4 different times during which we have, say for example, lunch. So in the UK we might say I'm going to have my dinner, but when you look at the terminology dinner, that would be different when we talk about it in the Asian context or in the American concept, because dinner would mean that you have the meal in the evening. But here, obviously, in the UK, when we say I'm going to have dinner, would mean that you're going to grab your meal, and that is something which you'll probably do just after lunchtime. So difference in culture will also kind of dictate how do we look at behaving and doing social interactions within the society. Now, when we talk about social impacts of tourism, we refer to what kind of changes it brings in the life of people, in specifically the people which are in a particular location. So when we look at, a lot of tourists are now visiting Barcelona, for example, in Spain, and it is becoming a frequented city for tourism, a modern city break. A lot of people within that city do not want tourists to come into the city, because it leads to a lot of nuisance, pollution, and obviously they feel that their cultural spaces are being invaded. So when we look at the social impact of tourism, it is impacting the life of local people in a particular area, and that is what we will say the social impact is. Now, when we look at cultural impact, how do we define cultural impact? As I said earlier, culture is all about how people interact and how do they behave in situations would be dictated from a point of view of the culture they come from. So cultural impact of tourism refers to changes, and or the things people observe in terms of their customs, the rites, the rituals, and in general what drives the community or their society from a point of view of their cultural beliefs. Now, having understood that, let's also understand what do I mean by social impact of social impact on tourism. When I say what is the impact of culture and society on tourism, so we know very clearly that tourism is not exclusively it's an economic activity. A lot of people over the years have started to travel because of affordability, distances becoming small, travel and air transport becoming more economical. So it has more ramifications than just being an economic activity. It also impacts people in a particular area, society in a particular area, infrastructure in a particular area, and all this tends to drive the impact which the society, the people living in that area have because of the tourism or because of tourism as an activity. So when we talk about social impact, cultural impact, we talk about socio-cultural impact of tourism, and sometimes it is difficult to measure in terms of what kind of an impact it has directly or indirectly, and to a certain extent, in this case, some of these impacts or effects which the activity has on the local community, on the area, could take years for it to be felt, and that is where what we want to be able to do in the second learning outcome, in the first assessment criteria, is to try and understand and study the social impact of tourism and tourism activity in a particular area, or in terms of the development of tourism as an activity in that area. So having now understood the definition, what we want to be able to do is dive into some of the impacts which this activity can have, the tourism as an activity can have within this sector. So when we look at social and you look at cultural, you're looking at talking about things like, social means related to society or people's life, and cultural means their beliefs, their rites, the rituals, and the interactions which people have. So tourism can have both positive and negative impact on social issues within a particular area or within a particular sector of travel and tourism. And when we look at that, You look at positive impacts that it serves is it supports, for example, peace. When you have tourist activity happening or destinations becoming popular within a particular location, a country, or a geography, you generally see peace and prosperity being there. You also see that people tend to respect cultural traditions, and they also tend to look at, it is considered having a positive impact because from an economical standpoint of view, it ends in creating a lot of jobs or brings across a lot of, economic activity to a particular area. Now, in some cases, socio-cultural impacts could also be ambiguous. That means they're not clear. Why they're not clear is because some of these impacts could be perceived to be negative or positive depending on how you take that, how you are directly or indirectly related to that particular effect. So when we look at negative impacts, tourism or hyperactivity of tourism might be negative to a particular destination because people might feel that their cultural spaces are being invaded, and that they feel that the infrastructure is under strain. So for them, from a personal standpoint of view, it would mean that it is having a negative impact. But for positive side of the impact, some people in the society might feel that because it brings in economic activity, jobs, growth in their incomes, and the associated business activities that they're able to pursue, which brings in growth and more revenue to them, could be seen as a positive impact. So it is ambiguous to a certain extent because some people might see it as negative, some people might see it as positive. Now, in the next few slides, what I've tried to do is basically highlight some of the negative socio-cultural impacts of tourism. One of the impacts, I've divided them into 4, and they tend to be commodification, standardization, loss of authenticity, and then also adaptation of tourist demands. So when we let's look at each of them in a bit more detail. What is commodification? Now, commodities, if you look at the word commodity basically means, what you, any idea in terms of when you say, if I say, what do you mean by commodity? So when you look at the word commodity, what we are looking at is we are trying to say that it is something which is, a raw material or an agricultural product which could be bought and sold. So anything which can be bought and sold could be classed as commodity. So when we look at commodification, what we're talking about is, to a certain extent, because of this activity, a lot of people get into buying and selling of goods, and this buying and selling of goods can lead to commoditization of a particular type of ritual, belief, or something which is associated very closely to a culture or religion in a particular location. So when you look at people traveling for the purposes of spiritual tourism, you generally see that in certain cases, when you look at northern parts of India, Nepal, certain destinations like Bali, wherein you will generally see people travel. And what has happened is that because religious rituals and activities have now been commoditized, that you can go in, you can have a spiritual, healing, or go and meditate and look at yoga and all that stuff. It tends to turn rituals or beliefs of a particular society into a commodity, wherein on the back of it, people start earning money. So that is what I mean by commoditization or commodification. And this tends to be turning a particular destination or a location into a particular type of tourism activity, which could be classified as commodification. So when you look at another example, when you look at Las Vegas, for example, when you look at Macau, when you look at Amsterdam, you look at these destinations, these destinations are synonymous with gambling. So because of the way in which they are marketed, they tend to be commoditized, and a particular type of product is now being positioned for selling or positioning across to consumers who want to come across and experience that activity. The second point that we will look at is loss of authenticity. So here, what we do get to see is that in certain emerging markets or countries which are underdeveloped, you see that tourists, souvenirs, artifacts, or key elements of let's put it this way, the society are being currently traded. So what is happening is, when you look at in Egypt, when the pyramids were discovered, and in the early 1900s, there were a lot of artifacts which are stolen from those places, and that led to loss of authenticity in terms of loss of culture or social beliefs, because some of these artifacts were taken abroad, and they were taken abroad, which meant that that particular location lost some part of their authentic history when we look at, loss of authenticity as a point. The third point that I would say is standardization. So when I say standardization, what we are talking about here is that due to the way certain destinations are today, advertised, what that would mean that they get typecast into satisfying certain types of desires or activities which tourists have when they travel to a particular destination. So when you look at, beach resorts or destinations like Mauritius, you look at the Seychelles, you look at the Bahamas, here, these destinations run the risk of standardization, because in this process, what is happening is that there are certain types of activities or recreational activities which are currently being positioned for this destination, which means that they get typecast as a location or as a tourist destination for these kind of activities. And then the infrastructure, the kind of offerings, everything which is geared around that particular thing starts to, offer those kind of, put them into a kind of a pigeonhole wherein only those kind of activities, facilities are being now, marketed to, sell that destination to tourists. So here we do tend to see that tourists often look at, recognizable facilities, like if you're going to the Bahamas or the Seychelles or the Mauritius, you're looking at, activities or recognizable infrastructure which will allow you to do scuba diving, try out snorkeling, go to beach related activities. And that is where it gets to typecast, wherein you will probably have more restaurants which will serve the seafood, or fast food restaurants which will serve seafood. And that tends to standardize the kind of offering these destinations are trying to offer. So, which is negative to a certain extent, because these destinations might have a lot more to offer, but because they've been put into that standard mold, it tends to kind of look at scoring on the point of standardization. Then we look at cultural clashes. So we've understood a lot of negative effects of social, impact on tourism. Let's look at some of the cultural clashes or cultural impacts. Now, sometimes you will see that in certain places, because of their religion, belief, culture, values, lifestyle, there are certain restrictions in certain places, and they tend to be because of the fact that the culture of that location, the culture of that, of the genre of people there tends to be of a particular type. So when you look at the Middle East, give you an example here. In the Middle East, it's very difficult for women to wear, clothes which actually flash a bit of skin, because their culture is such that women and showing of skin is not allowed. So in those cases, when you look at people visiting those locations, you will see that there tends to be a bit of a clash, and that could also lead that you're offending a particular law, or you're in some cases, looking at not complying with certain, requirements, because that location requires you to behave and observe the cultural traditions in a particular way. So in some cases, this can cause a cultural clash. Now, cultural clash can also arise because of economic inequality. So when we look at an example here, that in certain destinations, when you look at Jamaica, you look at Indonesia, Brazil, here the tourism employees have annual salaries of $1,500, and they work in excess of 37 to 40 hours per week to be able to earn this annual salary. But here, when you look at people coming in from destinations which are developed countries, or countries wherein there is more economic I would say prosperity, spending of $1,500 spends, which is what is equivalent to an annual salary of a worker there, tends to be kind of a backlash, because here they see people spending a lot of money, which is equivalent to a year's salary for an individual working within that sector. So here it causes an economic, it causes a cultural clash, and sometimes people are not very happy to see people spend that much money on a holiday when they feel that it is because of this disparity or inequality, because of unequal distribution of wealth. Now, there are other points that I would quickly get into in terms of slide to also understand some of the cultural issues, would be irritations due to tourist behavior. So I gave you an example earlier, of the Middle East, wherein in Muslim countries there are strict standards which exist in the appearance of and behavior of Muslim women. So you're expected to cover yourself in public places, but if you showcase skin or seem to be wearing short skirts or revealing clothes or having alcohol openly or consuming alcohol openly, then that is considered, against the law and against the tradition, and that causes irritation or some sort of a backlash, amongst the local population, and that is a negative impact of cultural issues, within that context. We can also look at other issues which are ethical issues, child labor, and then there are, the issues of other issues, things like, when you look at prostitution, sex tourism, those are other modern day issues that we can also look at, which could be having a negative impact of, socio-cultural negative impact on a particular society or on a particular destination. Now, let's look at two, theoretical aspects which have been, discussed over the years, which have originated out of the socio-cultural impact of tourism or development of tourism in a particular location. One of them is called demonstration effect. Now, demonstration effect is primarily a different approach which sometimes tourists take, in terms of, younger tourists in particular towards the residents of the community. Now, we know that there are in certain countries, there is aging population. So when we look at aging population and when we look at young tourists visiting certain locations, it is generally, under this particular theory, it's observed that tourists will have a certain behavioral change toward the local residents population because of the difference in, say, for example, the age. So in this case, sometimes we see local people will not, will note that, say, for example, if you're seen to be having pricely possessions, or if you're seen to be having, superior possessions, then sometimes you will see that this can have an impact on how people, perceive the local population to be. So if you are wealthy and if you have, pricey possessions, sometimes it's seen that this is a good city to go and visit because there are people which are more affluent, and obviously from that point of view, they have, had a more productive, working life from a prospect of, demonstrating wealth in that location. And this, the reason why this was coined as demonstration effect is because this may encourage the younger generation of the society to migrate to certain areas from rural areas in order to kind of, go after that particular lifestyle. So when you see an example that I'll give you here is of a demonstration effect is that you see a lot of people now today migrating from rural areas in developing or emerging countries into developed cities or, fast emerging modern cities, is because they would want to adapt that lifestyle or have that lifestyle of, a modern lifestyle which they aspire to get, which they cannot get within, say, a rural area or a town or a city which has smaller opportunities. So demonstration effect tends to be there when you look at China, for example. A lot of southern provinces, there's a mass migration which has happened from the southern provinces of China to modern, expanding industrialized cities because people are able to find work and they're able to get economic benefits at a younger age. And this then demonstrates, a desire towards a lifestyle of which the younger generation crave, and that is why they look at moving into urban areas or even, overseas. Now, another point that we look at is acculturalization, and this is where this story suggests that there are two different cultures which come in contact and for a certain length of time, and this leads to the exchange of ideas and products, which through time will lead to levels of conversions between cultures that they become quite similar. So acculturalization means that sometimes you will see that there is a mixing up of cultures or people from the society, which tends to happen, which allows them to, at some stage, after having a prolonged interaction, assimilate or reflect a similar culture or, show a similar culture that they've come from. So when you look at an example here would be when you look at the Americas in particular, when you look at their southern states and states which are very close to Mexico, there is a large increase over the years, and obviously this is something that you see over decades of this happening in terms of mixing of cultures. You see the Hispanic population in terms of growth and in terms of the emergence of the Hispanic populace or population in the southern counties is higher than in some of the other states of the United States, because here we see mixing of two cultures happening, and because they come in contact, they are border states, and we do see exchange of ideas and cultures coming together. And over a period of time, what you see is there's a conversion which tends to happen, and that conversions leads to something called acculturalization, and this is something that we do also get to see as an impact of as a negative impact of social cultural changes happening because of tourism. And a good example of that would be McDonald, the word McDonaldization, Coca-Colaization. That means over the years, some of the products which we have not consumed, not had, but because we've realized over the years that these are things that can be consumed, and the cultures have been attuned to that, what we do get to see is that there's a mixing up of things happening, which means at some stage there's a convergence which tends to happen between two cultures. So I hope it's okay up till here. So we've covered the first assessment criteria, which is understand the impact of socio-cultural impact on the development of travel and tourism. Now let's look at understanding environmental impacts. Now this is quite simple to understand, because when we look at tourism, when we look at the benefits of economic activity which tourism creates, we also have started to recently in the decade or two hear about the environmental impact of tourism on a particular society, on a particular area, or in a particular geography. So some of the things that we can think of, in terms of impacts which are positive and negative. Negative more so is climate change. We look at, in some cases, there are enormous pressures on area in terms of, the natural habitats, deforestation, for example, increased pollution. These are impacts that we get to see which are happening and are causing environmental issues. And this is because as tourism as an activity develops more in a particular area, we do get to see, detrimental or negative impacts happening on the environment. Now, let's look at some of these, with a few slides to understand some of the major points. So water resources. Water is the giver of life. We understand water as a resource is to be conserved. And we do get to see that when you look at visiting a hotel, in some places, not in all places, in most of the hotels, when you look at today, they ask you to, recycle the linen, for example, use the hand towel if you need to, only put it out for laundry if you feel that it needs to be replaced, switch the tap water off. And then these are things which are being done because they want to conserve or preserve water, in a hotel wherein obviously it is a resource which is used quite heavily. So when we look at water resources, tourism industry relies heavily on the usage of water, and water is used in the hotels, as you know, for laundry, for restaurants, for swimming pool, golf courses, personal use, things like that, and it is an important resource. So just to put this in perspective, how this can have a negative impact on the environment is that if you look at on a hot day, a tourist in a particular hotel consumes and uses about 440 liters of water. Now, this is almost double of what an average Spanish city inhabitant uses on an average day. And this figure is quite old because it's 1999. But if you look at the modern day figures, when you take a bath, you use about 67 liters of water. But if you take a shower, that water capacity or the utilization reduces to 21 liters. So here, water is pressures on water as a resource is a negative impact as far as environmental issues are concerned in the development of tourist activities. So if you look at Las Vegas, for example, as a hotel, and you look at some of the big hotels, in tourist destinations, you will see which have 3,000, 4,000 rooms. When you look at Las Vegas as a destination, and you see the amount of water which the hotel can use in a particular day, and that puts tremendous stress on water resources in that particular city. Now let's look at other things like local resources. So it also creates pressure on local resources like energy. When I say energy is light, food, raw material, other things which local community or the people or population buy in that area, and that would mean it could also put greater stress on local resources like transportation, other forms of resources which the city or the inhabitants of that city typically use. I'll give you an example here of Barcelona again, wherein there's a location in Barcelona which is called the Fira, and there is a big exhibition which is the Mobile World Congress, which happens every year for a couple of days, and that venue, Fira, has now become synonymous with large exhibitions. The term MICE, meeting, incentive, conferences and exhibitions, has become quite synonymous with Fira in Barcelona. Now, when there are exhibitions and events which are happening in that location, it puts a tremendous amount of stress and pressure on the local resources of the city in Barcelona. Things like hotels are always full, taxis, road traffic jams, you look at air pollution, those are things which become seasonal to a certain extent when the exhibitions are happening. And when it's not happening, obviously, the residents do feel a sigh of relief because, there's not much hectic activity happening in that location. Now, other things we look at, land degradation, you look at pollution. These are points that are kind of, self-explanatory. And what I've also done is put some speaker notes in the slides to elaborate some of these points. So when we look at pollution, we know very clearly that there is a detrimental effect on environment happening from a point of view of pollution. Now, it can be of different types. Air pollution, noise pollution, looking at littering, and you look at other forms, which is oil, chemical, sewage, and all those kind of pollutions. So when we look at pollution by transport, air is a major contributor in terms of tourism activity, because as we see tourism increasing, tourists as an activity increasing, we see air travel increasing, and because of which there's a lot of air pollution happening, which is leading to, say, holes in the ozone layer and things like that. And that could have long-term detrimental effect on the generations to come. Now, there are physical impacts which can also be there. For example, when you look at a destination, when we talk about the term pristine beaches or, sandy pristine beaches, we talk about these terms because these were things, which were primarily destinations to which only few people could travel. And some of these locations offered, let's put it this way, very pristine resources like beaches, lakes, riversides, mountaintops. But as the activity in those regions has increased, what we have seen is that some of this has led to, erosion of the landscape. That means over usage of the landscape, and that is having physical impact on, the location in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the degradation, the wear and tear, happening in that location. When we look at, say, for example, certain places in Malaysia, Bali, Indonesia, wherein there are tropical forests, and when people go and travel, and the tourism activity over the last 20, 30 years, 2 or 3 decades has increased so much that it is leading to the degradation of those locations in terms of decline in the, the flora and fauna, in terms of, the disappearing of certain species because they're coming in contact with, people, and that tends to create threats for certain types of ecosystem in that area. And that is what it refers to physical impact of tourism or tourism activity in terms of negative impact happening in a particular location. And then I've looked at defining a few of these impacts, in some of the slides, which are quite self-explanatory for you to go through. And, they're quite worded. So if you read some of these, like, depletion of ozone layer, it's quite self-explanatory in terms of why this is happening. And this is because of the use of chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs as we call them, air travel, emissions from the air travel which is happening. And this is leading to the depletion of ozone layer. Now, I hope it's okay up till now. Yeah? Okay. Now let's look at the third assessment criteria, which is technological issues which, have impact on the development of tourism and hospitality sector. Now, if I put it this way, there was no internet up until 1995. When Tim Berners-Lee introduced the internet, HTML and introduced the internet, we did not have access to the information. The access to information was physically through travel agents, operators, and you had to call up hotels and other bits, other types of players within the ecosystem to get hold of information. But with the coming in of the internet, what has happened is connectivity has enabled technology, connectivity has actually enabled information to flow across lots of different types of channels using technology. So when I say that, what it means is when you had to do a reservation in the olden times, you had to call the traditional way of doing that was to call a travel agent, make a booking, find out, get a brochure, and then make a booking, and then pay up the cost, and then look at booking a holiday. But because of the pace at which things are available today, and this is primarily because of technology, it has made things easier, but also made things difficult. Now, where are the things becoming difficult? Difficult because in order to keep pace with the changing technology, a lot of hotels, resorts, any type of key business or player within this sector, operating within this sector, is having to keep pace with the changing technology, which means you're having to upgrade things time and again in order to maintain competitive offering in the market. So let's look at a simple example here in terms of a couple of years back. When you look at let me put it this way: in the 1980s, when I traveled abroad for the first time, there used to be one television set in the lobby area or in the coffee shop within a hotel. But when TVs became, when LCD TVs started to come across and the old traditional TVs started to disappear, a lot of hotels started to put TVs in individual rooms. So you had in-room entertainment and also television sets now being made available within the rooms. There used to be some classification wherein these were available only in deluxe rooms up until the 90s, but if you switch forward to the year of 2000, we see normally all rooms now having television. Now, depending on the size and the area of the operation of the hotel, some hotels decide to put in 26-inch, some 32-inch. But in order to differentiate and create a differentiator using technology, a lot of premium hotels started to put in 32-inch, 37-inch, 14 television sets. That meant other competitors in the market needed to also react, and also in order to up their offering, had to increase or invest in technology. That means they also had to invest in bigger, better television sets, better in-room entertainment systems, which meant that they had to keep pace with the changing technology, and that became quite an expense. So when we look at some of the hotels today, they have 50-inch, 55-inch television systems. You can, even before checking out, see your bill on the television screen, and when you check out, you can pay for it at the counter, and you exactly know what you've been billed for. And the pace at which technology has come into this sector has also meant that people or businesses or organizations which have to stay competitive and attract consumers within this sector for tourism activity have to keep pace with technology. So things like interactive reservation systems, which allow you to look at making reservations directly, but also making your excess capacity available through mega websites like booking.com, travelsupermarket.com, have to have expensive back-end systems to be in place to keep track of this. So you can't have a customer booking in a room and again not having the technology wherein if the customer is booking and the other customer is trying to log in and book, then you say, okay, kindly hold because the other customer is still booking. So in order to have that system available, a lot of hotels, businesses, organizations in this sector are having to invest heavily on systems to upgrade technology. Things like guest room innovations, data mining in terms of analyzing customer preferences, the things that you eat, the things that you like, how you wine, how you dine, all that data is being stored in servers today, and that data serves up important reports which allow you to customize your offering towards a customer when they decide to come in and stay at the hotel for the second time round. And all of that utilizes technology. This technology helps marketers or people within management positions to be able to then look at making decisions, and these decisions can be done on decision support systems, executive support systems. So a lot of systems over the years have become available which allow management to look at making utilizing this information which is collected from customers or consumers, and at some stage repurpose this information into knowledge which allows them to send out promotional offers, other areas through which they can reach out to consumers to best offer to provide the best possible offerings for them to spend within the hotel or within the location. Now, technology has also meant globalization, and globalization to a certain extent has also warranted that any business within the sector invest heavily on technology, because if you have technology, you are able to send across information, easily, and that availability of information allows consumers to get hold of your brand and then book or spend with you with regards to tourism or leisure as an activity that they're looking at doing. So in general, technology also has had an impact within the sector, although positive, but there are some negative impacts of technology as well, and that is what I've highlighted in some of these slides in covering learning outcome 2. So with this, I hope it is quite evident that you've been able to understand and obviously look at some of the things that we covered, in the learning outcome 1, in regards to say, for example, in regards to understanding how technology has allowed, enabled a few things within this sector, but also at the same point in time, looked at making things easier, but also in certain aspects, making things, difficult from a point of view of issues that it creates for this sector. So in general, what we studied in learning outcome 1, we have now kind of reviewed them in a bit more detail, analyzed and assessed them in a bit more detail by getting into individual strong points to understand what are these issues, how are what kind of an impact they have on the sector, and then do these issues have a positive impact or a negative impact. Now with this, I'll probably end the session today. If you have any questions or queries, feel free to ask me via the email or drop me a text message. I'll come back to you, but we'll catch up same time next week to start with learning outcome 3. Thanks again, and have a good evening.